the title which I picked before I was actually knew exactly what I was going to talk about. I guess that's not unusual, but what was it? A time to build, time to sow, something like that. Ti- what?
Weep, yeah.
Time to weep? Oh, forget it. We're not.
A time to mourn.
Right.
Time to mourn.
Okay. Which was a Tisha B'Av type of title, and there's so much to talk about on those topics that I wasn't quite sure where I was going to go, and I spent a good part of today and other times thinking about this. Um, but I guess a lot of what I'm going to say today is based on a lecture I heard from Rabbi Y. Jacobson, if you're familiar with him, and he based a lot of his lecture on some things that he heard from Rabbi David Foreman. A time, learning how to grieve and learning how to deal with difficult things. It's a topic that all of us have. Um, Virtually everyone has gone through some things in life that are difficult to deal with. Certainly, when you get to my age, it's very rare that you haven't experienced the departure of some close dear ones in the family. But that's, so to speak, more normal, that eventually, thank God, both of my parents lived well into their 80s, and I miss them. None of us live forever, and we kind of accept that that's going to happen. But there are other people who go through much more difficult things and traumatic things, and particularly coming from Israel over the last few years. Was it now? It's 2.5 years, I think, since October 7th. Mm-hmm. And with hundreds of families mourning the young soldiers that passed away, or the victims of October 7th, and the truth is, to some extent, even on the other side, uh, there were some innocent victims on the other side also. Let's be honest. So it's a time when it's hard to know how to deal with that, with grief and with sorrow, etc. And with thinking about that, particularly in the context of Tisha B'Av, which is coming up this week, and it's a time when we all nationally gather for a time of mourning, um, about many, many things that happened in Jewish history. I'm not going to really discuss Tisha B'Av now because we'll do that in Mitzvah Shem on Thursday. I hope some of you will join us. But just briefly, of course, Tisha B'Av is a time when so many sad things happened in Jewish history and they all come together on that day. And how do we deal with those things? And how maybe we could contextualize them and help us understand where they come. Because it's really a very strange thing that we're one thing that's often comes to mind is there was a famous story about Napoleon, um, famous Napoleon Bonaparte, who actually not that well known that he, besides going through Europe, he spent some time in Israel. And he captured first in Egypt and then went up the coast from the lower coast all the way up to in Akko, was where he finally was not able to succeed. Whole story someday. I hope you'll let me be your tour guide to Akko and to tell you the amazing story of how really a very smart Jew, and that was not during the Jewish times, of course, when most of the Jews were not there during Napoleon's time, but there was a Jew who was very influential, and he managed to stop Napoleon. But anyway, during that time, he happened to be going through on Tisha B'Av, I think in Yaffo, and he passed by us, and he saw a synagogue, and there were a few Jews there. And they were going, and they were sitting on the floor, and they were weeping. And right, and he wondered what's going on. Here, Napoleon, I'm here to help you. Why you guys should be celebrating? No, we're weeping. What are you weeping about? We're weeping because the temple was destroyed. Really, how long ago was it destroyed? At that time, it was only, so to speak, maybe 1800 or 1700 years before. Today, it's much more. And really, how are you weeping about that? Because we feel that's an integral part of our lives. It's something very missing, and we can't go on knowing that we don't have that. And he said, a nation that's able to mourn something that happened so many years ago is the nation that will never be conquered, a nation that will last forever. There's something eternal about us. And that's sort of an introduction to what we're going to be talking about. Because it's difficult. And I think most people who are honest, they have a difficulty with Tisha B'Av. How are they able to genuinely feel sadness or mourn something that happened so long ago? Isn't it something that's something that's gone thousands of years ago? Eicha, which we're going to read Wednesday night and maybe Thursday morning, I don't know, but it's written by the prophet Jeremiah, which was by the first temple, probably more or less 2,500 years ago. About how are we supposed to experience that? So there's an interesting Gemara in Tanit that says, Kol hamitabel al Yerushalayim zochev v'ro'eh b'simchata. Whoever mourns for Jerusalem, zochev v'ro'eh, he sees the joy of it. Okay? And what's that?
No, merits.
Sees and merits to enjoy it. And that's often quoted, and we say that through our mourning on Tisha B'Av, God keeps all our tears, and eventually all of the temple will rebuild from all of those feelings and all those tears and all that over the years accumulate. Every year. I read something else that said that Motzai Tisha B'Av, the night after Tisha B'Av, he felt was one of the saddest times, because the night after Yom Kippur, we go through somewhat similar experience on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av of fasting, but when usually at the end of Yom Kippur is a great feeling of joy. You feel renewed, you feel reinvigorated, our sins were forgiven, we've been given a new lease on life, we've been able to. But here, Tisha B'Av, we went through and we mourned, and Beis HaMikdash is still not rebuilt, and that's said we stand still burning in a sense. In fact, the mourning goes on till the next day, and I don't want to talk about that now, but some of the main problems that caused Tisha B'Av, particularly hatred amongst Jewish people, oh boy, is that alive and well today still, and even probably at a higher level than almost my entire life. So it's hard to feel joy at the end of Tisha B'Av, but nevertheless, we go through that process, and we're hopeful that it's helpful. But the Chassam Sofer was his name is Rabbi Moshe Schreiber. Sofer means Schreiber. A lot of the Schreibers that are around today, or scribe, are his descendants, and he was one of the greatest scholars I think he died in 1839, the early part of the 19th century. Born in Frankfurt. We signed his name, Moshe Sofer Frankfurt, but he became famous as the Rav of Pressburg, which I think today is Bratislava. Somewhere. Bratislava is the name of the Brestperd today. It's somewhere in Hungary, Romania, that area. I'm not sure exactly. Whatever. Not Breslov. That's Bratislava. Yeah, Bratislava. Okay.
Slovakia.
So he pointed out, it seems to be a question that Lani would like, because she's into dikduk, which is grammar, and it seems that the grammar in that statement was not correct. It says Kol hamitabel al Yerushalayim zochev v'ro'eh b'simchata. Right? Whoever mourns sees and merits in its joy. So he has a question. What's the grammar question, Lonnie? Putting her on the spot. Okay, well, we'll put her on the spot. The spot is, it seems that's written in the wrong tense. Why is it written on? Okay, she got it. Why is it written in the present tense? It should be the future. Somebody who's born in Jerusalem will someday merit and understand the simcha of it. Why is it written in the present tense? That right now, what does that mean? It seems that it's off. Okay, so it's an interesting question, and we'll put it on the side, and we'll get back to it. So for most of the shiur today will be based on something that everybody in this room knows well, maybe, or maybe not. If you take if you're at home, I'm sure you have one as well. You can take a bencher, okay, typical bencher. I have the NCSY benchers here. We'll turn to page 59. Okay. And on page 59, we have one of the most famous Psalms that exists from all the Psalms, Psalm 126, I think it is. Shir HaMa'alot, right? Something most of us have sung and said many, many, many times. But we're going to look at it today in some depth and maybe see that it's, although we think we know what it's about, or maybe not, maybe we never even thought about it. We're just saying the words. Let's look at it a little bit more closely. That we say this typically on Shabbos and Yantif. Before we say that grace after meals. Various reasons why we say it. Or a halachic reason is because at every meal you're supposed to say at least a little bit of Torah to raise the level of it from being just a food fest and stuffing your face. So you're supposed to say something a little bit more Torah. So this is what it is. But we could have picked a lot of things. Why did they pick this? It of course says something about that we will someday we'll see the redemption of Zion. It's an uplifting tune, and in fact, just a little commentary. I like to tell people this sometimes that there's a famous tune that most people know about this from the Shir HaMa'alot, which is Shir HaMa'alot v'shuv Hashem. I think most of you have heard that tune, and it was written by anybody know? Yosef Rosenblatt, right? The famous Chazan, the Chazan of all, the Chazan of Chazanim, the greatest Chazan in my and many other people's opinion. And he wrote this, and we usually just sort of sing it. You hear him sing it, or you hear one or two other people sing it. You hear what a majestic, beautiful song is. And he wrote this song. Actually, he wrote it for that as his entry at the time. There was a competition going on. What's going to be the national anthem of the state of Israel when it's formed, right? And there were different entries, and his entry came in second. That the Shir HaMa'alot would have been the national anthem. It would have been a different country had that been the national anthem. When God is returning us to Zion, like we were dreaming. Okay, but anyway, it's certainly a beautiful thing. But let's look through it and read it. Okay. Even right from the beginning, it's a little bit difficult to understand. When Hashem brings us back to Zion, Hayinu kecholmim, we were like dreamers. Okay, so this is talking about the future. When he brings us back, we will like, what does that mean? Who was dreaming? When were we dreaming? We will be like we dreamt in the past. We will be like we're dreaming now. Does it mean the redemption will seem like a dream? Does it mean like we'll realize the exile had been a dream? What's it talking about? When we discover something that seemed so permanent was not the true reality. After all, what's a dream? A dream is when you're dreaming, and sometimes it can be very vivid and very etc. And all of a sudden, you wake up and it was just a dream. What does it mean? What does it mean? Okay, let's continue. None of them really in Mizmor. Like I'm saying, it's something that we sing all the time. But I think that many, when you think about it, nothing about it is simple. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nהיה b'dvarav. What does it say then? Az yimalei sechok pinu u'leshonenu rina. Sorry, did somebody say something? Okay. Az yimalei sechok pinu u'leshonenu rina. Then, when I guess at that time, when Hashem brings us back to Zion, then our mouths will be filled with laughter, and our tongues with song. Interesting. And there's a Gemara that is not really kept that often, in the Jewish context today. But supposedly a person is not supposed to be asur la'adam lamales pinav schok ba'olam hazeh. A person is not supposed to be laugh completely in the world that we live in today, because we are always in mourning for the temple. And therefore, how could we laugh? How could we be, almost in the context of by the rivers of Babylon psalm? How could we take joy if we don't remember Jerusalem all the time? I think in general the Jews are not keeping that one too well. We usually are I forget, I remember seeing an interview with Robin Williams. He was once in Germany, and he was saying, commenting, somebody said that, Germany is not known for people having their sense of humor. They're known for other things, but they're not known for that. And he was asked why, and he said, well, what did you do with all the funny people?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it was a serious comment. They said they shipped them off to Auschwitz. That's what they did with all the funny people, but whatever. So, Jews are generally, there are some very hysterical non-Jewish comedians, but we all know that Jews predominate in the comedy field, but nevertheless, then only will we be filled with joy. Okay? Only then will complete laughter be possible. Okay, fine. But then what happens? Oz Yomru Bagoyim Higdil Hashem Lasos Imela. Then, having talked about how we'll feel, we go to the media. We go to what the other nations will say. The nations will say, God did great things with these people, right? And then what will happen? Higdil Hashem Lasos Imanu. Who's speaking now? God did great things with us. So we sort of changing the camera, going to camera number 3 to the nations, and then going camera number 1 back to us. That Hashem that He did great things with us, and then Hayinu Smechim, we are going to be truly joyous. Okay. So what is going on with that? Why do we first have the nations recognize what Hashem does, and only then we recognize it? What's that mean? And what does that mean? Hayinu Smechim, we were joyous. We'll be joyous then, right? Up until that time when we're still in the exile, before the Geula, before the redemption, what are we so joyous about? When a person is going through the trauma, when a person is going through the difficulty, what are they joyous about? Okay. So far, everything clear in Shir HaMa'alot? Not so much. And then we go to something that seems completely out of left field. Shuva Hashem Eshavisenu, God, return our captives, or our captivity, ka'afikim ba'negev. Like afikim in the Negev. What are afikim b'Negev? What's an afik? Not a well-known word, right? We say this all the time. What does it mean? Afik.
Right.
What?
Right.
It's a type of stream.
Right.
It's a type of stream, okay? And it's in the Negev. The Negev could mean general south, but generally means Negev, like the Negev, the southern part of Israel, right? The Negev is extremely dry, and the land is very hard because there's very little rain. And then what happens every so often is you have flash floods. I don't know if you've ever seen a video of these things, or places where you can be standing and it looks like there's no water and nothing, and then you have to be very careful. In fact, as a tour guide, they give us a lot of warning about this. You have to be careful, and certainly in the spring when it could happen more times than others, that you can be standing and it looks like there's nothing going on, and then within a minute you could be in the middle of a huge, raging, ferociously fast river that comes down and wipes about everything in its way. That's an afikim b'Negev, right? That's this type of flash flood that's happening. It would seem like nothing was there, and then all of a sudden it's full. It appears. Okay, terrifying force. Okay, so what's the prayer here? Hashem, return us like afikim b'Negev, that suddenly, powerfully, we look like everything is lost, everything is dry, there's nothing here, there's no hope, it's dead, and all of a sudden, emerging from a place that completely seemed dry and lifeless, there's this amazing force of a stream that comes in and begins to bring water into it. It seemed impossible, and now becomes overwhelming, the reality in an instant. Okay. Shuva Hashem Yisrael Avikim Negev. But then it goes to another metaphor, seemingly having nothing to do with that. Hazorim bedima berina yiktsoru. Right? Which means what? Those who sow seed with tears will reap with joy. Okay, sowing with tears and reaping with joy. And that's a metaphor that's often used when, sometimes it's quoted when, you had a lot of difficulty in some project or something that was a lot of effort. I mean, I know Zev here can relate to that, all the efforts and blood and sweat and tears that he puts into trying to get a minion and trying to grow things and trying to come, right? But then you turn around and it comes around and there's joy when it comes out. So that's a metaphor that you could feel then that it's often used. But it seems that it switches then again. It says holoch yelech uvacho nose meshech hazara. What does this mean? Holoch yelech uvacho. He goes along. Who? Not clear who. Somebody, right? He's going along and he's crying, right? Bocho. He's crying. Bochet. Nosei b'meshech, meshech is hazara. That's a really hard one to translate. What is meshech hazara? Meshech, we need something pulling something, right? But it's sometimes it's translated. How do they translate it here in the NZSY budget? What do they say there? I didn't look.
And then the week says he trails the seed along with present joy.
Trails it along?
As he trails the seed.
Trails of seed. Okay.
Seeds.
A measure of seed. Okay, none of those, I mean, those who know Hebrew know that it's not, whatever it is, it's certainly not a literal translation. It's sort of a contextual translation. It's not clear what it means. Meshach hazar. That's something that the seeding pulls something. Not clear what that means. And he's crying as he's planting. And he's going and he's planting as you plant, a little bit here and there, like, that was the days before mass produced, these machines. Today, you look at a farm, the machines that can plant, spread the seeds like amazing. But in the old days, the farmer had some seeds and he would throw it here, throw it there, right? That's how he would do it. He would cry. He would cry. Usually that's understood why, because the farmer has only so much seed that he made from last year's crop, and now he has to take some of that and throw it in the ground, and it's going to rot and it's going to decompose, and he hopes it's going to turn into something great. They say the Gemara says that a farmer is in fact it's called Zerach Amunah, it's called Zram, is because that a farmer has to have a lot of faith in God. That he's taking the seed he already has, throwing it in the ground, hoping that it's going to rain, hoping that the animals don't get it, hoping that the insects don't get it, right? So it needs a lot of faith. Okay, but we have to keep it here within the context of what we're saying here and what this is, and then it concludes with Bo Yavo Berina. He finally comes with joy, no say alumosov, carrying his alumos. What are alumos? They're bundles, okay? And there's one basic way of interpreting things in general in Tanakh. There's many examples of this. Is that if we want to understand in Hebrew, according to the Torah, what a word means, you have to look at where this word appears in the Torah, and then you can get from that, and especially the first place it appears, and then understand from that. Some of these words we pointed out, it's hard. Afikim doesn't appear anywhere. But the alumos appears in one famous place. Anybody know what that is? Bundles?
Oh, is it like Joseph?
Joseph, good, excellent. Right? Joseph. When Joseph, what happened there?
He has the dream.
He had a dream.
Bowing down and the sheaves,
I have a dream, right? And that dream, anachnu ma'almim alumim mitoch hasadeh. This is the word. We were gathering sheaves in the field, and then what happened? That my aluma stood up in the middle, and all of your alumot came and bowed down to it. Okay, so it recalls certainly Yosef's dream that his brothers were bowing down to him. Okay, but what happened? What was the result of that dream? How was it received?
well,
Not well. Not well. Right? The brothers were annoyed with him before. They felt that he was etc. And now they really began to hate him. It said after that dream. By Yosef so they continued to hate him because of his dreams. Okay.
But
So even
ultimately, it was the goal of getting out of Egypt.
true, we're getting there. We're going to get there. But we're seeing what David HaMelech in in this constructing this psalm was wanted to bring to us in a very beautiful way as we will go through this. So so we know already this has something to do with Yosef and his alumos, that at the end of the day he's carrying his alumos. Okay. And at the beginning, it was a problem of causing hatred. And in fact, we could return from here to the beginning of the Shir HaMa'alot, because Hayinu kecholmim, we were like dreamers, right? And of course, the whole story of Joseph is circles a lot about dreams, and he's the dreamer. He's the dreamer of this dream and another dream, and then the interpreter of dreams. Right later in the story, dreams are very central to Joseph's life. So the beginning and end of the Mizmor are pointing to this story, okay, of Joseph. But even taking this a little bit further, we talked before about the word afikim, the rivers, right, the flash floods. That doesn't appear in the Chumash in any form, as I mentioned, but there is a word of which comes from the same shoresh, the same root of afikim, also in the story of Joseph. And what's that word? Anybody, I don't know, can guess?
What was the question?
Afik, right? And it comes really from, where does afik come? It comes from, there was a tremendous amount, there was a water, and it goes out like that, right? We have it in the story of Joseph where it says first that when he saw his brothers, he cried, and then vayis apak. He held himself back, right? He went into the room, came out, and then finally there was the time, v'lo yachol Yosef lehitapek. Yosef could not any longer hold back the tears from coming, and his wasn't coming. He couldn't restrain himself. He couldn't hold his emotions back, right?
That's the opposite meaning.
Well, I mean something that's held up. It's sort of like a dam. Here in Oregon, we have a lot of dams, right? They hold it every once in a while. They open them up, and the water rushes out, right? There was a dam holding back. What was Yosef? What was he holding back?
Tears.
He was holding back tears and emotions and things that had been welling up inside him now for at least 22 years, right? He was at this time, he was sold into slavery when he was 17. At this point, he was 39 when this story happens, when he finally reveals himself to his brothers. And he can no longer hold it in. The commentaries there say he wanted to hold it in, didn't want to hold it in, but it just was going to come out. And he held back these emotions. And till this point, how did the brothers see him? Did they see him as an emotional person? Did they see him they saw him as this cold, heartless, merciless tyrant who's making demands on them, forcing them to come down, won't do, immediately suspects them of being spies, throws them into prison, right? Makes all these unreasonable comments, demands that they bring down this brother that, right? And if it's elderly father, they say he's demand that they bring him down anyway. It seems like he's harsh, cold, dry, has no compassion. They couldn't imagine what was about to happen. And then what happened was suddenly Yosef's restraint broke, and he sent everyone else out of the room except his brothers, right? And he began to cry. And his crying was so intense, it says, that Vayishma Shama Beit Paro, it is even heard over in the palace of Palace. They weren't there in the room, but this broke out from him so loudly and so greatly that, it all came out, everything that had been inside of him. It was everything that of his suffering was pouring out, all of being hated in his brothers, that he was thrown into a pit, that he was sold, that he was a slave, that he was falsely accused, that he was thrown into a pit a second time, that he was then being separated from his father from some of his years. His tears came like afikim banegev, like this flash flood, right? That came from in this arid place. That all of a sudden he's now coming in and coming through this river with a tremendous burst of emotional energy that had been all pent up. It was almost like, I think about it here in Seaside, like a tsunami, You see signs all over. Those of you who are not in seaside, and not everywhere you go here, there's signs, tsunami, you gotta worry about it, to know where to go if this thing happens, right? Something can be apparently calm, it can become terrifyingly powerful very quickly. You have to be aware of that. Okay. Now, Yosef, what kind of person was he? Was he an emotional person? Was he not an emotional person? He was very emotional, right? He was very emotional. The Torah doesn't frequently describe people in the men, certainly the men in the Torah, as crying. We never find Adam cried or Noah cried, even though he had what to cry about. Abraham cried once when his wife died, right? Yitzchak doesn't cry. Yaakov cries once when he meets Rachel, but that was sort of a cry of joy, more according to the Midrash. He cried because he knew that she wouldn't last with him, but still. But Yosef, we find 7 times that he cries. He cries when the brothers first come down, and when he sees Binyamin, and when he goes, and when they think about him, and when they come later. He cries and he cries. But, right? Nevertheless, he was a deeply emotional person. But before at this point, he cried privately. He cried, right? Each time he turned away when the brothers were around, so he went into the other room. He cried over there. He didn't let them see his emotions. He kind of vent into himself, right? But now at this point, what happened at this point? There was a point that where he had at this point what happened? Well, I don't want to go and take a whole long segue into what was going on with why Joseph put his brothers through what he put them through. It's a very fascinating discussion, but very briefly, certainly one of the main reasons was because he wanted to see if they had changed. He wanted to see, with those same brothers who once sold one brother as a slave, here he was going to put them in the box of the same situation and see if they had the opportunity to go home and say, well, what can we do? Unfortunately, it wasn't our fault. He stole the cup. What can we, it's God, and then just turn around and go back. Or would they stand and fight for that brother and not be willing under any circumstance to leave him behind? And when he saw they were willing to do that, and he saw how much his brothers had changed, and he heard about how much his father had been crying for him all these years, and he saw that Yehuda was willing to remain as a slave, that moment the flood burst out of him. He couldn't hold it back anymore. Okay, so Yosef in this story is representing the Ka'afikim Banegev. But there's another person in this Shir HaMa'alot we learn about. He's holoch yelech uvacho. He's walking around and crying, and continues to cry, and he's continuing to cry, planting seeds but crying. And who's the person who's crying and doesn't stop crying? That's of course his father, Yaakov. We find that when he finds out that Joseph is taken, he doesn't allow himself and he doesn't allow himself to be consoled, and he cries and he continues to cry, right? Not one sudden burst like Afikim Banegev, but as he walks slowly, he cries continually. He plants one seed after the other. He carries his sorrow over a long period of time. Yaakov had already had much pain in his life, even before that. His struggles with his brother Esav, with his father-in-law Lavan, with the death of Rachel, the difficulties with his family. But now he mourned the greatest mourning of his life. Taraf Yosef, my son has been taken and he's been torn apart. And he believed that his son had been what the sons had told him. They had been devoured by a wild animal. But yet, Vayima'en lehitnachem. He refused to be consoled. He refused to be consoled, but comforted. Okay? And in fact, he said that when they tried to console him, he said, Ki ered el yagon sha'ola, I'm going to come down to my grave. I'm never going to be consoled. The rest of my life, I'm going to be in mourning for Joseph. The question is why? Why was that? Why did Yaakov never let himself be consoled? And Rashi gives an interesting answer. He says normally one of God's great gifts to us is that He allows us to forget and to be consoled. Like I said, most of us, certainly in this room, and I think on the Zoom, I've gone through periods of life in which we had to go through a very painful time and a very painful period. When somebody close to you is it dies, when you go through a very difficult loss, whatever it is, and we have that, and we go through that, and it's a very sharp pain. But one of God's great gifts is that over time, somehow it recedes. And it's there still, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but it's not as immediate, not as sharp, not as biting. It's not as difficult. Okay? And we get some sign of closure. We know that that's finished, that's over. But Rashi says that gift that God gave us is that Hashem gives that I forget the words he says, that it's that mace is nishkach min halev, that a dead person is forgotten a little bit from the heart. But he says that didn't apply. It doesn't apply, so the person isn't really dead. And Joseph here was not really dead. So therefore, because Joseph was not really dead, he didn't have this gift, and therefore the pain remained for him just as immediate and just as sharp, and it never receded. Okay, famous Rashi, but yeah, there's more to that, and we'll see what we can do with that and what that means for us, especially. And that's the topic today. How do we deal with pain? And I'm thinking of various people who I know. Just today, Zev and I met with somebody who was mourning the loss of his son, and to a terrible accident, and it's always there, and it's always hard, and even when he starts to smile and to laugh, things will come up and reminds him, and then it'll be just as painful. Or I'm thinking a very close relative of mine, somebody I'm very close to, who lost her husband when he was a relatively young man, and she has many children, and he died from brain cancer, and she's never been able to really find any kind of consolation. It's almost like Vayima'in Lehit Nachem. Sometimes I feel that it's almost she refuses to allow herself to be consoled. I remember a couple times I asked her, maybe you should consider grief counseling, and she said, why? What are they going to do? Bring him back? And of course, I said to her, that's not the point. They're not going to bring it back, but they help you deal with it and learn to move on, so to speak. But not interested. And she tells me, and rightfully so, nobody else can really tell me how to feel or how to deal with a situation. Nobody else is there. It's being able to be consoled is a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing. And when we say closure, and a healthy type of closure, it doesn't mean that we forget that person. It doesn't mean that they're not part of our lives anymore, or that the memories disappear, or that we stop loving them, or anything like that. But it means that there's a particular door that we had open to that person, where we could go and we could talk to them, and could be with them, we could hug them, we could love them, and physically, and that's closed. And then a new chapter of life must begin. Rabbi Jacobson said something very interesting. He said that when he was sitting Shiva for his father, for who he was very close to, he said that somebody came and sometimes people say the stupidest things at Shiva, unfortunately. Sometimes they mean well, and sometimes whatever. But I remember many, some things that somebody told me once when I was sitting Shiva that were very helpful. And he said that somebody told him, gave him a helpful image. He said that when somebody very close to you dies, it's as though there's a ditch that was dug right in your living room. The ditch right there. And at first, every time you walk through the room, you fall into that ditch, and you wallow in the pain that's in that ditch. But over time, what happens? The ditch doesn't go away, but you learn to walk around it. You're aware of it, but you're not letting yourself fall into it. And every so often, of course, you're stumbling around and you're not careful, and you're in the ditch. It comes back again. But nevertheless, time doesn't remove the ditch. It teaches us how to live around it. And it couldn't be just when you fall, as we all know, there's sometimes a particular memory will come up, a particular life cycle event, or a particular you'll be there at a wedding and you realize all of a sudden how it's just not the same without your parent there, without this person there, how a milestone I wish I could share with them. They could have had this nachas they don't have. There are different times that ditch opens up, and there's certain things that remind you. I remember even speaking of Shiva. I remember, I'm not the type who cries very easily, as opposed to my wife. But I'm not the type who cries very easily. But I remember I was sitting in the Shiva, and I had a somewhat complicated relationship with my father. I loved him, but we had our issues, and I was there for a few days, and we went through whatever we went through, and then on one of the last days of the shiva, all of a sudden, a person who I knew was a very, very dear and close friend of his walked in, who had himself, sleeping, who had himself gone through an extremely difficult thing in the past year before that. And I walked in, I just lost it. I cried like a baby, with holding on to him. I couldn't move. I remembered how somehow it triggered how my father felt about him, and I was able to feel things. I don't know. It's a strange thing how those things work. And yeah. So most of us learn how to walk around that ditch, so to speak. But that's something Yaakov couldn't do. He couldn't walk around the ditch. For him, the story wasn't over. He couldn't emotionally detach at all from the son. We want to go at a level deeper as to why that is. The children, Yaakov's children, it says what Vayakumu kol banav v'kol banotav l'nachamo vayimayim li'imnachen. All his sons and all his daughters came to console him. Well, what daughters? There's a midrash that says that he had 12 sons and 12 daughters. And we only mentioned Dinah, but maybe he had 13. I don't know. But the 12 sons and 12 daughters, they all came and they tried to what? They were born with twins, however it worked. And they came to console him. And you can imagine how they came to console him. They might have said to him, listen, Yaakov, we're sitting around the Shabbos table, right? You have 23 children here, and all of them are stars. Reuven, such a sensitive person, and Shimon, such a fiery, great person, and Levi, such a saint, and Yehuda, such a leader, and this one is this, and this one is that. And they're all wonderful. They're all wonderful, and all the daughters are wonderful, and etc. And you're having so much nachas. Yeah, there's one who's not here. But let's be honest, first of all, he was a bit of a problem, if you remember, right? He was always getting into trouble. He brought the evil tidings about his brothers. He caused a lot of rift in the family. He was a kid who was, I wouldn't say off the derech, but he was a troubled kid, And of course, look. Statistically, you're doing great. Only 1 out of 24, right? You gotta, what? Why are you always focused on what's missing? You're just looking at the hole and not at the bagel. You're not looking at the big picture here, Yaakov, right? Why do you refuse to be? Okay, I understand he's missing, but you should think about all the blessings you have. You're a wealthy man. You have this. You have all this beautiful family around you. Why do you refuse to be consoled? But and he was essentially saying, I can't become consoled. You can say that because you don't understand who Joseph was. You don't understand what he carries with him. You don't understand what he represented. I know there's greatness there, and I refuse something deep down inside me saying his story isn't over. It says when Joseph came had those dreams, it says Va'aviv shamar et hadavar, the father held on to it. Right? Rashi says there, his father always, even though he rebuked him for why are you saying this thing that you're going to lord it over your brothers, he nevertheless also said, you know, someday this is going to happen. Something's going to happen here. He knew this wasn't a simple thing, right? And he somehow had this. He didn't stop loving Yosef. He didn't stop believing in him. And this can happen. This is something that is so relevant to us. And sometimes, a lot of times, families have, particularly in the religious world today, we have there's very many. Some might say even most families have, one kid who is not quite with the program, is is uh, is going in a different direction than the parents would have liked, and and sometimes it's a mild thing, but sometimes some kids, in the religious world, not religious world, Orthodox world, non-Orthodox world, everybody, very families have this, that kids are going off in a direction that their parents were hoping that they weren't going. It could even be that a kid might fall into addiction or be emotionally or spiritually distant or fallen into a pit, so to speak. And some might advise the parents, say, well, hey, you got to love other kids and they're doing well. And in fact, maybe you should keep this kid far away. It shouldn't be a bad influence on the kids who are there. You should keep him outside. He should concentrate on the children who are doing well. But a parent who really knows that child has potential knows that they should never give up on that child. They know that there's something deep within the child that someday will give him some nachas. Someday they'll be able to have a future, that there's a soul there that's trying to get out to the surface. And Yaakov knew that this would happen. And this is interesting, particularly with Yosef, in that you see this in a very interesting incident in the life of Yosef. What happened in Yosef with Yosef? He was go to the part of the story where he had been a slave, and then he came to was bought by Potiphar, right? Right, Potiphar, and Potiphar brought him into his house, and Potiphar loved Joseph. He thought he was the greatest thing. He, in a short time, made him the CEO of his household, gave him everything, controlled full run of the house. He wanted to run everything for him, right? Trusted him completely, right? But what happened in the house? Mrs. Potiphar, right? So Mrs. Potiphar was quite a chaleria, as they would say in Yiddish, right? she was uh, she was somebody who was, you know, she basically made her decided that Yosef was Yefei Tor, Yefei Mareh, very handsome, very beautiful. She had to have him, and she tried to seduce him. And according to the Midrash, she was a very beautiful, comely woman. And think about Joseph, right? In the situation that he was. He was 17. I don't know, certainly the men here know that when you're at that age, your hormones are pretty much at their highest point. Or he had the desire, so to speak, he could have had. He was alone. His mother was gone many years. His brothers had sold him off. He was like an orphan. He was a slave. Nobody was around, right? And there's this woman who not only is beautiful and not only his boss and trying to seduce him. And she says that she would do yom, 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 yom. She would try every day to seduce him in every way possible, right? And he was alone, vulnerable, and young, right? She threatened him. Not only said, "Could do this the easy way. If not, I'll have you killed. I'll have you imprisoned for life." And she was pretty successful for that, by the way, but for other things that happened, right? And then it says that one day Joseph Vayovo Yosef lasos melachto. The Torah says Joseph came in to do his work. Okay, and Rashi comments, the Gemara comments. What does that mean? Of course, he came to do his work. What else? Why is it saying that? It says it's a means that he wasn't just there that day to do his work, but he had decided, I give up. That's it. I'll give in to this temptation. I'm gonna allow her to be with her. Like she shouldn't leave me alone. I'm gonna give in to it. And it says, and then at the moment that she reached for him, and it says Vayima'en, and it's interesting. Vayima'en, if you're into laning, it has a shalsheles. You know what a shalsheles is? That's Avril's doing this ab thing, and it basically is an unusual. There's only a few of them in the Torah, and it's a very dramatic intonation. It's right. That's how you say it, right? Right. What?
Three times.
Three times, right? Up and down, right? And each time it means something. I won't go, it's taking too long, so I'm not going to go through the other one. But each time it's giving you a little context. And here, Vayimahin, does that mean I refuse? Does that mean, is he really refusing? Not refusing? There's something about it that he's refusing, but there's also shalshelis. Okay? And he runs out, right? He runs out after that. And what did he do? He took his garment. He fled. He left his garment, and she took the garment and claimed that he had tried to rape her, and he was imprisoned. We all know the story. But what happened at that point? What caused him to run out at the last moment? So there's a midrash that says, the Gemara says that Yosef saw in the window to Yokano Shalaviv. He saw his father's image. Okay, what does that mean? What it doesn't there's nothing in the text that seems to where that comes from, that he saw his father's image. Where does that come from? So there's one very beautiful interpretation I saw once, that what the window was, he saw the mirror. He saw a mirror and he saw his own image, really, and he looked very much like his father. And so when he saw that, he saw his father, and he saw, that he's going to give in to this woman now, but in his father's eyes, he's going to be never going to be again the same son with the same integrity, with the same moral standing, and that he was before. And he saw that in that sense, he said he saw this father who never stopped loving him. He saw he saw something there that was, sensed that his father never left him, his father never detached from him, his father still cried for him, and across this distance somehow he felt, I'm still wanted. I'm still loved. My father hasn't given up on me. He sees greatness in me. And it gave him the strength not to surrender, to maintain his dignity, and to preserve his morality. But where does that come? How do we know that? So the Or HaChaim, one of the classic commentaries, says a very beautiful thing. There's another Vayima'en in the story. And we mentioned it before, right? That brothers and sisters had come, were getting to trying to console him. Vayima'en lehinachem. That Jacob also refused. Jacob's Vayima'en and Joseph's Vayima'en. The Or HaChaim says there's a connection. There's a Gzera Shava. There's a connection between those two Vayima'ens. How are they connected? They're connected because both of them, there's a refusal. There's a refusal there of Jacob to give up on Joseph. That was the thing that gave Joseph the power to refuse to give up on himself being a son of Yaakov. There was something firm. There was something unmoved. Something. It was a loyalty and in fact that the word amen, amen, it comes from that same the word which means to be faithful, emunah. That was there. And it's something. I mean, I think all of us have heard stories about sometimes a parent has, a mother particularly often has, sometimes has an intuition that something is going on with their child, even if they're far away, and even if they don't. Somehow there's something in the airwaves. I don't know. Rosie's shaking your head. I don't know if you ever felt this about what? Yeah, that there's something that a person can connect in a way that and there was this connection somehow between Yaakov and Yosef, that deep sense of Yaakov refusing absolutely to give up on Yosef was the thing that affected Yosef, and he was able to have this sense that I'm my father's son. Where's this going? And I'm getting closer to the end here, so don't worry too much. I hope how long you're planning on this being. Let's look at the what happened at the end of the story. at the end of the story, when Yosef becomes, eventually what happens, Yosef becomes the ruler in Egypt. He's the one who's giving out grain, right? Right? And the brothers all come for food, everybody comes for food. And then when finally he reveals himself to them, so what does he say? He says to them, they're all terrified. Who knows what he's going to do to them now? Who knows what is going to happen? They realized all these lies they've been telling themselves all these years come crashing down on them. All the things that we all know about that story was the most dramatic moment, perhaps, in the whole Chumash, when he says, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? You've been talking about the father, the father, the father. How did you put the father through all this?" Right? And they're all standing there. And then what does Joseph say? "I am Joseph, who you sent me to Mitzrayim. Atem al te'atzvu. Don't be upset. Calm down. Everything will be fine. Don't be angry with yourselves." Why? Because lo atem shalachtem oti heina ki Elokim. You're not the ones who sent me here. Who sent me here? God sent me here. Why did he send me here? To provide life and livelihood for who? And that's remarkable. Actually, Yosef is the one who should be saying he should calm down and he should. But Yosef came. Well, how was he able to see this? What was Joseph was seeing himself here? That he had come to see himself as part of a very intricate divine plan. He saw that my whole story and this amazing things that have happened to him, going sent as a soul, then as a slave, and somehow being raised to be the most powerful man, basically in the superpower of the world, of the greatest superpower of the world at the time of Egypt, is something going on here that's deeper to it, and it's something that happens because what was he? He saw himself as being sent there. And that can be seen very interestingly. Joseph was sent, how many times was he put in a pit? Twice, right? His brothers put him in a pit before they sold him. And then again, Potiphar put him in a pit,
Oh.
right? They both times in the pit. He saw himself a little bit as a seed. As a seed. Now, seed, when it's put into the ground, in order to grow, it needs the earth. And the seed can see itself as being, as we said, unfortunate before. Here it was the seed, it was going to be the staff of life, and now it's putting into the earth, and it's being put through all these difficulties, etc., and then crushed, etc. But it also is something that going through this difficult thing, he's going to grow ultimately into becoming the grain, the life-giving product, which is happening. And Joseph is able to see himself. He developed that sensitivity basically because of his father's belief in him, which caused him to believe in himself as having a stronger purpose, as having something greater. That even though Joseph had an extremely difficult time, right, in his life from the time that he was thrown into that pit.
How did he know that his father was believing it?
He had that sense, and obviously he didn't communicate directly, but somehow he had that sense. He had that ability. It must be that he had this, that he knew there was something special about that. And there are many midrashim that talk about that, in the way that they come together, that they were both always thinking about each other. And then he heard from the brothers how much the father was still mourning him, the father was still thinking about him, the father was still never allowed himself to, because he had heard that for sure. And he developed, he was of such an incredible character that went through these difficult things and went through the pain and the suffering, but saw it not as something that to let himself wallow in that, but see himself, there's an ultimate purpose in this, and that ultimately it's going to come out for the best, and that it's maybe putting the seed in bedima with this hazorim bedima, putting the seed in with crying, right? But someday it's going to come out to be for the best. His message was, I wasn't sold, I was sent here. I wasn't merely discarded, I was planted. I was sent here to the particular place. It's part of a future that didn't become visible. And how did that seed, go to your question, when a seed goes in the ground, it needs something to be able to grow. What does it need to grow? It needs water. What's the water? Hazorim bedima, the tears. Whose tears, right? The tears, Jacob's tears. He needs that Jacob's tears, that his father of tears of not being willing, giving him life. It was preventing him from collapsing into self-pity. It was drawing him upward from the pit. It was Moshe Hazara. It was right. Hazar, how did the pasuk go again? It's bringing the seed up and not allowing him to wallow into it. Yaakov walked and cried while he was planting. Yosef was his seed. And the father's tears kept him alive until the time for him to grow. That's it. Just to finish here. So again, thinking about Yosef and all the difficulty that he went through. Imagine if you were had a major corporation and you had various resumes on your desk. You needed somebody to be your right-hand man to help run the place, and you get a resume from a 17-year-old kid whose mother had died when he was 9, and his brothers hated him, and they'd sold him into slavery, and etc. And he'd been. Would you make him the CEO or be very difficult? Why would Paro, I mean, Potiphar take him? But obviously, but Yosef, it says we had this chain, he had this, that he was able to, everybody saw something that he was confident, that he was above, that he had a sense of mission, that he sense of calm, the expense of wisdom that happened from this grace, this composure, this confidence that he had, because he didn't define himself as somebody who was thrown away. He didn't define himself as somebody who was, rejected by my family. He would define himself as somebody who's a seed planted by Hashem, and that there's a purpose. And he keeps saying that God didn't, even to in the pit still with the baker and the butler, God sent me here. God is giving me this power. God is giving me to Paro when he meant only God. He sees himself as something that is greatness can grow from that. And if we think about that to take it in a broader sense, and that's why we say in the Shir HaMa'alot, it's just not just about Yosef, it's about the Jewish people. Because aren't the Jewish people the people who were, had gone through so much of our history? It's drenched with tears and with blood and with exiles and with persecutions and with so many things that have happened, and much of which we talk about on Tisha B'Av, right? And we were thrown into all kinds of pits. But our mourning, when we think about it on Tisha B'Av, isn't just to mourn our losses and say, Nebuch, look at all these difficulties we went through. But it's to say because we don't look at Jerusalem as something that was dead and that was gone and that was in the past. We look at it as something still alive, that this seed inside us, there's this hope that's alive and can be rejuvenated. To get to the Chassam Sofer's question, why it's only in not the future tense but the present tense. Somebody who's Misabel Yerushalayim Zocher right now, even if we don't see physically, unfortunately, yet the rebuilding of Jerusalem, but you can take joy in the fact that the very fact, like Napoleon said, and even more so, the fact that we see ourselves as not just the victims of persecution, etc. Sometimes people, look at, unfortunately, that's the story of too many Jews who looked at Jewish history as a miserable, terrible existence that we want to get away from. But how lucky we are, Ashreinu Matel Chalkenu, where we say how fortunate we are. There's a famous story about Rav Moshe Feinstein, one of the great sages of our time, who I was merited to see when I was young, and he said, "Why did so many Jews leave observance when they were in America?" And he said that the problem with one of them was because too many of them said to their children in Yiddish, "Es ist schwer zu sein a Yid." It's difficult to be Jewish. They should have said to their children, "Good to sein a Yid. It's great to be Jewish. It's great to be part of this tradition. It's great to have this Torah." And yes, we go through difficulties, but you know why we have difficulties? Because God has very big plans for us, and with all the difficulties that we've gone through, as I'm sure all of you have had a chance to think about, what the greatest miracle of all of history is, that the fact that the Jewish people are still here and that we're surviving, and Baruch Hashem today with the state of Israel and the rejuvenation of the Jewish people, but in general that we've had such an inordinate, way out of proportion effect on the world, and bringing the world so much good and so much wisdom and so much kindness, and so many good things come from us, and that story comes from that even though on Tisha B'Av we talk about the difficult things we've done to, but we expect the story to continue. We expect that seed to eventually come. And that Zocha V'roeh, we see it today. And that's now we can understand what does that means. Hayinu kecholnim. We were like dreamers. Because what does that mean? This the Brisker Rav, they say, has said the difference between the dream and reality. We can sometimes have a frightening dream, a nightmare, right? And then you wake up, and then a few minutes later, you go, okay, well, that was just a silly dream, right? And we've all seen so many movies where they're going through difficult things, and they woke up, it's a dream. I think we saw The Wizard of Oz. It was built on that premise to some extent, right? All the difficult things of a dream, right? But sometimes it's reality. Some people going through difficult things wake up in the morning and they're still very much in that awful reality. And people, can sometimes, I don't know if anybody here have had a dream about what it might have been like to have been in the Holocaust and to have gone through that. I've gone through some dreams. I don't know if it's that, but difficult dreams. But Baruch Hashem, I woke up and I wasn't. But those people woke up in the morning to everything they had. But yet some great people, many people somehow got through that, and thank God we were, one of the communities we were in, Forest Hills, was many survivors, and one of the great things that we had there was had the great privilege of being with survivors who gone through unbelievable things, but somehow came and built a new life and built for descendants and built incredible lives because they knew that they're there as a seed to continue to the future. They're there to continue what's going on. There's so many stories of there was a woman like a year or two ago who had like 150, no, she had 500 descendants, right? And she, in fact, was the only survivor of her family, but somehow she was able to continue, and the world we see today is something that we awake from that. So Hayinu, the point is that how is that we're able to do that? Even people who went through the difficulties, the blessing is that someday we'll be like dreamers. We'll be able to put that in, contextualize it. We'll able to say that, well, yes, there's this difficult thing, but it's part of a larger context. It's part of a great part of the survivor. It's of survivorship that we'll have. We remained alive. We continued. We can always come back. We could always come again. And then when we ourselves are able to look back and say that those will be, and there are many people. It's funny how many people. I don't know. Today is a whole different story. I don't want to get into now about how the nations of the world view Israel, but at least in general, over the last 50 years, many more non-Jews have seen Israel as a miracle than Jews themselves sometimes. And they said, Higdil Hashem lasot emela. Look what a great thing Hashem did with these people. And that sometimes helps us understand Higdil Hashem lasot imanu, how great Hashem has done with us. And through that, Hayinu smechim, to be that we can be joyous. So I guess, how do we deal with difficulty in our lives and grief and going through difficult things? It's it's not a matter of denying those that those things are bad, and they are hard. They are hard when they go through them, but being able to put it in the context of that we're here in this world for a short time. We each have a task to accomplish in this world. We're part of a much greater story that began long ago and continues to the future. And part of not all of that story is never necessarily a rose garden fun and games. People go through sometimes some very difficult things, but that Hashem has a plan for each of us, and each of us has our own pekala, as they say in Yiddish, our own group of things that we have to go through, our own challenges, our own difficulties. What? A pekala means like a package. It comes from that. There's a famous metaphor that they say that they allowed a bunch of people to come into a room, and they said you can take your pekala, whatever that is, all the stuff that includes, all the tsuris you have, all the because, and you can put it down, but you have to take one out and 99.9%, if not more, of people take their own back, right?
My grandmother used to.
Your grandmother used to say that?
She
Okay.
says it was the laundry on those clothes and I can take it back.
Okay, so it's a
Thank you.
famous metaphor.
Same.
And each of us has our stuff that we have to accomplish. And if we look at the things that we have in life and the difficult things that we have in life is, that's not, that's not because we shouldn't feel sorry for ourselves, but God put us in this situation and He has a reason. And if we come through it and we have a positive attitude that it's for the best, and that things will eventually be able to get through it in a much more healthy way. Yeah.
Tisha B'Av.
Well, of course, and Tisha B'Av doing that on a national level. As I said, that we see that so many things that the Jewish people have gone through, are due to our own choices to some extent. That we did things that brought upon ourselves. But on the other hand, going through all this exile and going through all the thousands of years, we've been able to accomplish a lot of good in the world. A lot of to bring like the Rambam famously says that, if you look at the world, the way the world was before the Torah came in, which was basically just pagans and cult worship and full of lust, etc., that the Jewish people directly and through the daughter religions, as he says, of Christianity and Islam, which brought a lot of the positive teachings of Judaism into the world. We brought the world a lot closer to goodness and God and to faith. And hopefully we're close to the end of that process, and we should see the Geula Shlema, the full redemption, B'meira b'yameinu, speedily in our days.